Being an avid reader of No Sleep, I decided to share some of these amazing stories with my cousin. After hearing some of them, we got into a discussion of whether we have encountered anything paranormal in our lives. Turns out, we both shared tidbits of an experience we had when we went to Vietnam many years ago, and we were able to put together a coherent understanding of what exactly happened. Warning, this may be a little long, but I want to be as thorough as possible. In the summer of 2002, my family and I, with my cousin, Mike, and his parents, took a trip to Vietnam, the birthplace of our parents. For the duration of the month that we were there, we stayed at our grandparents' house, my maternal and his paternal, in Saigon, Vietnam. The front of the house, it was very narrow, but it was very long, very much so like the grey one in this picture. The house itself was relatively old and easily predates the Vietnam War, and so it was built 5 stories high. The reason houses were built so high was because the annual monsoons would bring in so much rainwater that the whole first floor would be flooded for many months. It was not until about 20 years ago that the government installed a sewer system to stop this problem. Today, the first floor of the house is divided into 2 sections. The front part being a small school supply store that my grandparents run, and the back is the kitchen and the dining room. My grandparents were not the original owners of this house. Rather, they bought it in the 1970s so their kids could go to a better school district. My mum had spent more than half her life in this house, and she told me that she hated every moment of it. Before she'd gotten married to my dad and moved out, she told me that she would always feel uneasy being in the house by herself, especially at night. Despite my questioning, I was never able to get a straight answer out of why she was so afraid. But the only thing I could get from her was that the feeling of uneasiness occurred mainly to her and her now deceased sister. I asked her if she still felt this way now, since we returned, but she told me that it was gone, and that ever since she was married to my dad, the dread disappeared. At this time, my cousin and I were 8 and 9 respectively, so we took to the prospect of exploring every story very seriously. The stairs of the house, they were built in a fashion that 3/4 of each floor contained rooms, while the other half was the stairs. In this case, we could look directly down from the stairs on the 4th floor and be able to see the steps on the 1st floor. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor contained the old rooms of my mum and aunts and uncles. When we got to the 5th floor, we were past the brink of exhaustion, as this was a very large house, and we decided to rest on the very last step before reaching the floor on the 5th. This floor, it looked completely different from the rest of the house. There was no tacky wallpaper or even windows, so the whole area, it was barely visible from the sunlight coming from the 4th floor. From what I could see, it was made up of cement or some form of grey paint, because the whole area, it lacked any colour at all. The layout was similar to the other floors, except that there was one room to my left that had a door that looked different from the other doors in the house. This one was made of what looked like slab, as it was grey like the walls. I would not have noticed this if there wasn't a large rustic-looking padlock on the door. My cousin and I, we pondered why a door would need to be locked from the outside, but we both turned our attention to the sound of hurried steps on the stairs. Our older cousin, who lived in the house, had made his way to the 4th floor, but immediately stopped just short of the first step towards the 5th. He looked up at us with kind of a forced smile that looked more like a frown and told us to come down from there, in Vietnamese, of course. I asked why, and he said in a semi-joking tone that there was a demon that would eat our skin if we played there at night. It was then that I noticed it had begun to get dark, and the whole house, it began to look more and more like the 5th floor. We rushed down as fast as we could, towards the presence of our cousin, who gave us a stern look while he told us not to explore the house at night. Always curious, I asked why again, but he merely stated that it would be safer and that under no circumstances should we ever go on the 5th floor without an adult. I brushed this off as it was time to eat dinner, and soon I'd completely forgotten about what my cousin had said. The combination of jet lag, airline food, real Vietnamese cooking, and the heat caused a severe stomach ache in both our bellies as we got ready for bed. We both slept in a room on the 2nd floor of the house, while the adults slept on the 3rd and 4th, where the air conditioner was. Neither of us got any real sleep that night, as we laid in our bed, sweating profusely and annoyed by constant but dull pain in our stomach. I dozed off for a while, until I was woken by a light tapping on my arm. I thought it was a mosquito at first, so I tried to swat it away with my left hand, until my hand collided with something solid, something warm. Mike stood beside my bed, covered in sweat, and asked me to get some water with him from the kitchen on the 1st floor. He said that it was too dark and he didn't want to go alone. I looked at the clock. It read 3:07, which I still remember because it was my cousin's birthday, March 7th. Anyways, I got out of bed and we left the room. The whole house was now completely grey, except for in the corners that were illuminated by the light of the moon. We were able to see just enough to make our way downstairs, slowly. I wish I'd known where all the light switches were, but that was my first night there. As we set foot on the 1st floor, I had this uncontrollable feeling of dread, like I was drowning. I looked at my cousin, and by the grimace on his face, I could tell that he felt it too. That was when we saw it. Through the shafts of the moonlight shining into the kitchen from the half-closed blinds, we could distinctly make out a figure in the kitchen. At first, I thought it must have been one of the adults, but everything about it, it felt so unfamiliar, not human. By this time, the dread had completely immobilized me, but I was able to slump down into a squat and get a better view. It stood, facing the wall, slightly illuminated by the light of the moon, causing it to shine a light blue. It was a woman wearing an áo đai, a Vietnamese dress, but it clung to her body so tightly, almost like it was wet. Her long, black hair draped over the front of her face but it looked disheveled, as if she had just come in from the rain. That was when she turned, slowly, towards our direction. My mind reeled as the realization sunk in. She had no feet, only tattered remains of the Aodai where her legs should be. She began to glide towards us, her head leaning at an impossible angle towards her left shoulder and her hands gently tucked at her side. As the moonlight reflected off her back, I could make out large, black void circles where her eyes should be, her hair covering portions of it. Adrenaline had well and truly set in at this point, and I felt my legs returning. I grabbed my cousin by his shirt collar and half dragged him up the stairs. By the time I reached the second floor, I turned around, just in time to see her halfway up the stairs. I scooted back towards the wall, and Mike ran into the room, slamming the door behind him. I backed away as she glided to the steps of our floor, and now she was less than 10 feet from me. Once again, I ran up the stairs onto the third floor, and I was horrified to see her still on my heels. I struggled on the last flight of steps as my lungs began to give out. I was breathing rapidly, and all I could do was slump down to the ground of the fourth floor and drag my body to the corner of the door where my parents slept. Even if I wasn't so racked with fear to scream out, I couldn't even get out any words through the huge gasp of breath I was taking. As she came close to the fourth floor, I could see her dark, soulless eye sockets once again, her hair barely masking them. She had now reached the top of the stairs and was now an arm's length from me. But she did not look down at where I cowered. She didn't even acknowledge me and kept on walking or gliding towards the stairs to the fifth floor. I sat there, curled up in a ball, as I watched her glide up the steps leading to the last floor. I can only assume that she entered the locked room, as I never saw her come down the stairs while I sat there for what seemed like hours. My mind kept reeling from the experience. When I finally recovered my composure, I slowly walked down to my room. I got into my bed and I fell into a deep sleep. No stomach ache, no sense of the heat. Nothing could awake me. I fell into a long and uninterrupted sleep. I guess our minds work in weird ways, because I had completely forgotten about that experience until my cousin brought it up. Apparently, I blocked it from my memory, but I know that for the rest of the month that I was there, I didn't leave my room at night ever again. I gave my cousin a good punch in the arm for abandoning me, but I forgave him because, well, I probably would have done the same. I think that there is a connection between the woman and my mum. I know that there must be something wrong with that house, because not long after, my grandparents moved out. They live with us now.